So much is unfolding in Asia. Now we are going to talk about it. Political analyst Ross Feingold is joining us from Taipei to discuss the latest developments in China and South Korea. Ross, thank you so much for joining us here on A News once again. So much is unfolding as we have spoken. Let's start with Taiwan. With Taiwan reporting that China has deployed its largest naval fleet in nearly 3 decades. What implications does this have for the security of the Indo-Pacific region, especially considering the U.S.'s commitment to Taiwan under the Taiwan Relations Act?
It puts enormous stress on the militaries of the region because the militaries in the region have to respond accordingly, whether that's Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, or other countries with claims in the South China Sea. They all have to dispatch their own aircraft and their own Navy ships to monitor what the Chinese are doing. So that costs fuel, it costs manpower hours, it's wear and tear on the aircraft and the ships of the other countries' Air Force and Navy. So China knows this, that it really tests the ability of these other countries to respond. And then the other side of that is every time that China does this, they're improving their own capabilities. They learn from their mistakes, they learn from what doesn't work, and it improves their capability to fight a war if indeed there will be a war in this part of the world.
Well, Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te's recent Pacific tour, let's talk about that as well, which included stopovers in U.S. territories, has been labeled as a provocation by the Beijing. How significant is this tour in the terms of U.S.-Taiwan relations, and does it justify China's escalatory response?
The recent presidents, that is President Lai's predecessors, they all made similar stopovers in the United States when they were transiting the United States to visit countries that Taiwan still has diplomatic relations with, whether that's in the Pacific Ocean among Pacific Island countries or in the Caribbean or Central America. So there was nothing new about this trip, which is why we hear United States government spokespeople saying that China should not use this as a reason to engage in large-scale military exercises. So by itself, the trip is not a breakthrough. It's not something new. The Taiwan president has done this kind of stopover or transit many, many times, always meets U.S. politicians when he or she does so. So nothing new about the trip. But the way that China has increasingly responded to these interactions between the United States and Taiwan, again, it's to dispatch its military to engage in large-scale military exercises, which really is a cause for great concern by Taiwan as well as other countries in the region.
And lastly, before we move on to South Korea, I would like to ask your opinion about the new administration of United States is coming up. So what do we expect with the US-Taiwan, US-China, China-Taiwan relationship and this triangle? What do we expect in the future?
It's a great question because we know that President-elect Trump, the one issue that he is most focused on is the trade deficit between the United States and China. He's threatened to increase tariffs. He wants the United States to import less from China. So the issue that really is of great interest to the president is going to be trade. But the US-China agenda has so many issues, whether that's Taiwan, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, Tibet, fentanyl precursor chemicals, intellectual property theft, South China Sea. It's such a long agenda where the two sides have very different, large differences of opinion. So I think the thing to look for on that is what do Trump's team do? What is their attitudes? What kind of new policies do they want to implement, whether that's at the State Department or the Department of Defense or other federal government agencies? But as of now, Trump's appointees to work in these various federal agencies appear to be very tough on China. So I would expect some more actions like sanctions on Chinese companies and restrictions on exports of certain technology products to become the norm for the next administration.
Now let's move on to South Korea because it is also an interesting situation that has unfolded last week. President Yoon Suk-yeol's declaration of martial law last week has sparked a constitutional crisis in South Korea, with major unions, including the Metal Workers Union and financial institutions, staging protests. What economic impact could this political crisis have on South Korea, particularly on its status as the world's 4th largest economy?
As of now, I don't think we're seeing a significant impact on things like manufacturing or exports, especially in the technology space. The politics don't really affect, as of now, a lot of the companies that help drive South Korea's economy, such as the tech sector, which is, again, mostly for export. The stock market has seemed to have priced this in and moved on. Foreign investors in South Korea's stock market are not fleeing either. And also investors in different parts or different countries of East Asia, they're used to some political instability. Like in Japan, they've had 4 prime ministers in the last 4 years. Thailand has a military coup every few years. Taiwan is under threat from a Chinese invasion. So I think investors in this part of the world, they're used to a little bit of political instability as well. So they're not fleeing from South Korea at the moment.
With that also, South Korea's economic growth, depending on entertainment and technology, does it really involve politics? It doesn't, does it? Because the entertainment sector and the technology works on, no matter what happens in the politics, despite a coup may change the things. But what would you say about that?
That's right. The technology sector and increasingly the cultural sector, those are for export. And we know how popular Korean cultural exports have become around the world, whether that's K-pop or television series. Korea has been enormously successful in exporting their culture. The thing that South Korea needs to be a bit careful about, though, with political instability is whether or not it affects inbound tourism. And unlike manufacturing for export, the tech sector for export, they're somewhat insulated from the political side of things. But the political instability, of course, it might cause some people from the United States, Europe, or even Japan or Taiwan or other places in East Asia, they might think twice in the short term about visiting South Korea. So there is some risk to the tourism sector.
Well, with questions surrounding who is currently running the country, how might this leadership void affect South Korea's governance? And how are South Korea's allies, particularly the United States, viewing the martial law declaration and subsequent crisis?
Well, it certainly leads to confusion because whether it's the United States or Japan, which are increasingly South Korea's close security partners, the United States originally, but in recent years, Japan as well, it's confusion. They don't know who's in charge. The party chairman and the prime minister are sort of saying that the president has agreed to back out from any involvement in national defense or foreign policy issues, but that's not really provided for in South Korean law. There's no basis for the president to step away and the prime minister and a party leader to take on an official role on those issues. So there's definitely some confusion, and I'm sure the United States, whether it's the outgoing Biden administration or the incoming Trump administration, as well as Japan, they want South Korea to move on from this and move on very, very quickly.
About this also, we are going to see probable unfolding situations. Thank you so much, Ross, for joining us here on A News. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.